Blue White Breakdown presented by Penn Live. It's Thursday. It's noon. This is what we do. This is what we do, Max. This is what we do. May 22nd here as we're heading into Memorial Day weekend. If you're joining us live, lunchtime, awesome. Love to hear it. Drop some comments, notes, questions, whatever you want in the chat. Well, not whatever you want, but you know what I mean. And if you're not watching with us live or listening live, hope you're sitting somewhere warm, somewhere with family, enjoying some Memorial Day weekend, family and friends, and having a good time. Max, I'm sure you got Brian Urlacher over your shoulder. It looks like.
Come on, yeah. Listen. I was able to sneak back home a little bit for Memorial Day weekend here this weekend, so I'm in the childhood bedroom. We've got Urlacher over there. If we turn the camera just a little bit, you can see a Harlem Globetrotters ball there. So we got a lot of memorabilia here. We're loving it. Good to see the family, of course, especially on the holiday weekend. Hoping to see some baseball and softball games for my niece and nephew. We're on a heater, Johnny. We're on a heater.
I love it. No, I mean, a Brian Urlacher fathead screams childhood bedroom of Bears fan. So I dig it. I'm still in Philly. We'll be getting my way down to the Jersey Shore either later tonight or tomorrow. And fingers crossed for some good weather because it's rainy in Philly right now. So not sure if it's going to be super, bring in the summer kind of weather, but alas, that's what we got. That's what we're working with. Max, what Penn State is working with is a recruiting class in 2026 that we've talked about before, and we'll be talking about again today. What they've got in that class and what they lost-ish from the class, but gained in a guaranteed commit and signee in Daniel Jennings. The 2026, now 2025 four-star defensive end from West Virginia, reclassifying earlier this week. Officially, Penn State announced and joining the team this summer. So we're going to dive into that. We'll also dive into Troy Hoon, one of two quarterback commits in this class, getting an Elite 11 invitation. That's a big deal for him. Also along the lines of Daniel Jennings, he's not the only one who was officially added to the roster, officially added to the program. Those freshman signees from December who were late, going to be summer enrollees, as well as some, a couple of big transfers that we've talked a lot about in Trebor, Pena, and Amare Campbell. But let's start with Daniel Jennings, Max. Max Granville did this last year, reclassifying. That was like a week or two, a couple days before the season.
Right.
So a heck of a lot less runway. For him to get acclimated to the college game than Daniel will have. But what are your initial takes on this?
Yeah, well, Johnny, I think if we look at the Max Granville situation last year, it starts to really make just a ton of sense for anybody who is in a position academically to do this, to do it. Because like Max Granville last year, of course, Granville is in a situation where he's like the correct age for where he is academically now. Like he just turned 19 in January. So he's on track that way. But he came in when he was supposed to still be in high school officially, and he needed a little bit of time to get up to speed physically. But by about mid-season last year, probably October, I mean, he was already in it with the scheme. He'd put on some weight already. I had it in my story the other day. I think he put on like about 20 pounds between the time he enrolled to right now. So like he got that quickly. He got that nutrition and that physical development at Penn State that he's not getting in an extra year of high school. And guess what? They kept his red shirt, so they still have him for 4 years. I mean, it's no different than if he stayed in high school for an extra year and played as a true freshman. They still get him for 4 years. He's redshirted. And then beyond that, because he got the physical development underway, because he was able to learn the scheme from fall camp and on, he was a primary backup to the best player on the defense last year down the stretch in the college football playoff. I mean, Max Granville was the number 2 behind Abdul Carter for third down situations in the winter last year. So if you look at those factors, it just made so much sense for Max Granville to be able to come here early, to get into the program and do all these things. Of course, there are stipulations. You have to be as good as Max Granville, and you have to be academically ready to get there. Daniel Jones is halfway there. Or Daniel Jennings, sorry. Wow, Daniel Jones. I knew I was going to do that because every time I've been talking about him with people this week, I've wanted to say Daniel Jones, and it just comes out weird. Penn State obviously hopes the success of Daniel Jennings is a little better than Mr. Jones was in the NFL, but
Well, they'll take Daniel Jennings being a first round pick. What they
they'll
won't
take
take
that.
what they won't take is Daniel Jennings tripping over his feet with no one around him. If you remember that from Daniel Jones against the Eagles a few years back, I don't know if you that might not be sticking in your head like it sticks in mine. That's okay.
Oh no, dude! If you're an NFL fan, that is burned into your brain. Like that was just hilarious and unfortunate all at once. But so Daniel Jennings is what we're talking about, and Jennings, nobody's expecting him to come in and play immediately as a freshman, but they will have him for all of fall camp. They will give him time to get up to speed physically, and then as you know, they can preserve his red shirt, and he can still play in 4 regular season games and throughout the whole postseason. Like the early enrollment thing in January has become such a commonplace for recruits these days. You know, guys who are gonna go D1 are starting to pick up academic credits as early as they can. But like I could see this becoming even more and more like of a thing here with reclassifying and moving up because it worked so well with Granville. Like there aren't a lot of bad like things to it. You get a guy for 4 years still and they get physical training before they're supposed to. It's a huge deal. I mean, it really changes everything for this guy. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a big pickup for Penn State, and I really like it.
Yeah, and with Daniel Jennings, like it's a similar, obviously very similar situation. Same thing that happened with Max Granville last year. Now, like you mentioned, in terms of there not being pressure,
No,
for him to come in and play immediately, like he might not be the backup in the CFP like Max was,
right.
last year, right? I don't think there's any expectation that that's ultimately where this will end up when we're talking about the Penn State defensive line in January and December. Like that's not necessarily what's going to happen. But I think it's also worth taking a look at this defensive end room. And, when it comes to, younger guys having to develop and having to step up, like, you're going to have Dennis Sutton, obviously, on one end, but you lost Abdul Carter and Amin Vanover and Smith Vilbert. Jamel Lyons, he was supposed to be a part of this program, and he's no longer with the team. And so you have all these departures, whether they were, after last season or prior to last season. And you're Deion Barnes, the defensive line coach, and you're James Franklin, and you're trying to stock this group as much as you possibly can. Zariah Fisher, a 6-year senior, is as veteran, as experienced as they come in terms of like literally years in college football.
Right.
The injuries have stunted his growth in terms of like on the field, or stunted his ability, to show what he can do. But then you have Max Granville, who I expect, and I think you expect to have a really big 2025 season. But then beyond that, there are like a lot of question marks. Like Anai White comes in as a transfer from A&M. Haven't heard much on like his progress, kind of where he fits into the whole thing. If he's still more in that project territory, or if he's more in that instant contributor territory, I would probably lean, the former as opposed to the latter. But then you've got guys like, Mason Robinson, and, there's just a collection of guys who have signed in the Malachi Williams, like a
Mhm.
collection of guys who have signed in the last couple to few recruiting classes who, haven't really carved out a role for themselves. And someone's going to have to, like, they're going to run 2 or 3 deep at defensive end. They typically do, especially when, Penn State isn't playing Oregon or Ohio State in the regular season. Like, I would expect an Dennis Sutton to be on the field for most of the snaps for those games, but you have to have other players step up, especially if someone like Denai gets hurt. So as many bodies as possible, right?
Mhm.
And it's also not like they're just grabbing this guy off the street and saying like, "Hey, come play defensive end for us." This is a
Right.
4-star player, like he, working and dominating the way he did in the West Virginia football. Like it's not like it's not nothing, but it's
Mhm.
not Texas football like Max Granville was playing.
Sure.
a couple years ago. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But he's a talented young prospect who you might as well get him on campus and might as well get him in the room and might as well have him work and learn from Denai Dennis Sutton and to work with Deion Barnes.
Yeah, I think like the bottom line is you're going to get more out of spending a full year in a Division 1 football program than you are out of a high school program. So if they feel he's ready to handle it, like if they, I mean, a part of it is being able to take college classes and survive on your own too. Like that is a factor that is adjacent to football that we're not talking about. But if they think he's ready to do it, like it makes a lot of sense to do it. The situation was similar last year too, though, Johnny. As deep as the defensive end room ended up being. When Max Granville joined in, we thought like, we weren't positive what it was going to look like. Amin Vanover ended up having a really good second half of the season, and he was a very important role piece there. Smith Vilbert, we were not sure what Penn State was getting out of him. I don't think Penn State was sure what they were getting out of him. He ended up being a fine fourth or fifth defensive end. Like there was a lot of uncertainty in the room last year as well. So you bring Max Granville in there, and he played a little bit. I don't think the expectation for Daniel Jennings is to play right away, but it is a room that could use all the depth it can get. It's a guy who not only was very talented in high school and put together double-digit sacks as a junior. He's been committed to Penn State for a really long time. This is a guy whose family the staff knows extremely well. They've been recruiting him for I believe over a year at this point. I think he's been committed. So this is a move that makes a lot of sense, and I'm very curious to see Jennings when he gets onto campus. Obviously, it's going to be a while until we get to talk to him for the first time. But I think it makes sense. I think it's a deep defensive end group, and it continues to be a position where some names just kind of have to separate themselves. I don't expect it to be Jennings, but there are some names. I mean, you said a few of them: Malachi Williams, Mason Robinson, are kind of those depth pieces that they'd love to see take an extra step. And I think Jalen Harvey and the freshman Ivan Kamaju are really interesting guys to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a big collection of DNs there, but Harvey and Kamaju, like
Mhm.
those two guys, I could see carving out a real role for themselves in the fall when that rolls around, or even start to hear more about those guys in August training camp, which is around the corner, Max. Like I know we're sitting here in May as we go, we're inching closer, just like a week or so away from June, and then you're a couple months. You're a couple months away from August training camp, and so those two transfers, Trebor Pena and Amare Campbell, switching gears a little bit. Both those guys officially on board with the program same day as when Penn State announced that Daniel Jennings was joining the program and reclassifying, confirming that. Heights and weights for those two guys, Trebor Pena and Amare Campbell. We've got 5'10", 185 for Pena, the wide receiver slot guy from Syracuse, and then 6', 230 for Amare Campbell, the linebacker slash maybe you use him off the edge a little bit. Like I could be intrigued there.
Mhm.
Not like as a true defensive end, but in blitzing packages and whatever else that Jim Knowles might have up his sleeve. But more of a true linebacker from North Carolina, a guy who can get after the quarterback and has some explosiveness to him. Also 10 freshmen, Max, who did not join the program in January, who are going to be joining the program shortly, whether in the next week or two, right, as they get into summer sessions and all that. Heights and weights for those guys as well. Anything stand out to you there? Anything jump out off the page?
Yeah, I honestly like there's a lot of things that just kind of I kind of have notes on with all this, and all of it is so speculative because it's just heights and weights. But with Pena, like he is listed 2 inches shorter at Penn State than he was at Syracuse, which I think is interesting. We always knew he was kind of going to be the slot guy when he got here, and it's going to be on Andy Kotelnicki to be able to figure out how to pair Trevor Pena alongside a guy like Devontae Ross, who obviously has a lot of skill and quick breaks and short routes. So, if Ross has a little more of the top end speed and they like that, maybe he moves out to the outside more often. But there's a lot of versatility in this wide receiver room, but I do think that the additions of Pena and Ross are a little bit similar in their skill sets, and I'm curious to see how that works out. As far as Campbell goes, you mentioned maybe bring him off the edge, even if it's not off the edge. They really needed a linebacker who was a talented blitzer. I mean, Tony Rojas has done it a little bit, but Kobe King could really mix it up, in the middle of the line of scrimmage. A guy at 6 foot and 230 pounds is going to be able to get in there and play in the box and get his nose dirty. So, I mean, Amare Campbell has experience in blitzing. I think he had 4.5 sacks last season, if I've got that right. And like just a talented linebacker. I'm really curious. I think he's going to be fun to watch. To go down the list, a couple more, Johnny. Jeff Exenor, the wide receiver. There's been a trend with this year's wide receiver group, outside of Lyric Samuel, that Kobe Howard and Matt Outen both showed up on campus looking like they've been in college for 2 years already. They are physically built, look very ready. I thought it was just I thought it was really impressive to see the spot that their bodies are at already as early enrolled freshmen. And Exenor is at 6'1" and 220 pounds. I mean, this is a guy who kind of played all over the place at McDonough. Like, they used him as a wildcat quarterback when they needed to at times. He could probably play tight end if they wanted him to. But big body. And then the other one, there's two more. The actual tight end, Matt Henderson, 6'5" and 215. For no other reason other than Luke Reynolds, Andrew Olesh, these guys who have come into the tight end room over the past few years have just put on weight at unbelievable paces. At 6'5" and 215, he's going to have to do that to play even by his sophomore year. But I just think it's fun to see how quick these guys are able to put on the weight. So I'm curious with him. And I'll tell you what, Malachi Goodman, the offensive lineman, is coming in here with some serious size already. 6'6" and 310 pounds. I mean, it might not be the 310 pounds that Penn State wants him carrying. Like, there may be some adjustment with his diet or whatever to get him to the right spot. But on paper, that size is D1 ready. And I think that's really interesting. So it's a cool group. There's going to be a lot of stuff to watch as we get into August camp.
Exeter and Goodman were going to be the two guys I was going to bring up. So we're on the same wavelength there. I mean, Goodman, one of the best offensive line prospects in the country, signing in the 2025 recruiting class. And, they're good at tackle, for this season, with Nolan Rucci and Anthony Donko expected to duke it out at right tackle with Drew Shelton on the left. And then even on the interior, they'll be all right. But like Goodman looking down the line, that's a lot to work with. And it's that massive size with a lot of talent too, and some nimbleness. So, that's good to see. Exeter, this wide receiver room, because they added the 3 transfer wide receivers in Pena, Ross, and Kyron Hudson, who's one of those kind of bigger body, types. You would expect those 3 guys to start. We've talked about that. We would expect those 3 guys to be the 3 primaries, but at the same time, you also have Tyser Denmark and Kobe. You mentioned Kobe Howard and Lyric Samuel, 2 freshmen who have impressed the staff. Over spring camp. Interested to see if Exeter in any way can get into that mix a little bit, because there has been this approach. I still go back to speaking to Marcus Hagan's wide receivers coach in early April. It was early April or end of March, when there was some buzz around Tyser Denmark, and James Franklin said the phrase, "Hey, like, his time is now." And I asked Marcus about that, and he said, "Shoot, it's everyone's time is now. Like, we are, pushing for a national championship. We're going to play the best players." And Exeter, who was, again, one of the top wide receiver prospects, certainly in the region and around the country in that recruiting cycle, I'm intrigued to see if he can make an early good impression. It might be difficult to learn the offense that quickly and then make an immediate impact, but who knows? Who knows? So those 2 guys definitely stood out to me, both on paper as we, get more details about them, but also, just knowing what kind of players, what kind of talents they are.
Yeah, it's super interesting to stay on the frame of defensive ends as well. We mentioned Daniel Jennings. He's actually not on campus yet. He's not been added to the roster, but he has been announced as a signee. He and then Imhotep Charter running back Jabri Wallace-Coleman, who I think is a really good player who has a great future at Penn State. Those are the only 2 guys from the 2025 class now who have yet to get on campus. They will later this summer. They'll certainly be ready by fall camp. But this group is interesting. The other defensive ends that are coming in, Cortez Harris and Chaz Coleman, a couple of guys who also have some work to do on their bodies. 6'3", 205 for Harris. And then Coleman is an interesting one, played quarterback in high school, but 6'4", 220. Heck of a basketball tape on that kid. He's dynamic, but like gonna have to put some weight on to contribute. But it's interesting. There's a lot of intriguing prospects in this class. This 2025 class didn't really come in as like it was not a top 10 group. It was not the 2022 class. It was not what they expect this 2026 class to be. But there's a lot of names in it that could surprise, could contribute early, or could really develop into pieces down the road. I think it's an intriguing class. But to stay on the recruiting topic, Johnny, there were official visits last weekend. There are not any official visits this coming weekend. They will pick back up next weekend. I feel like it's really interesting that Penn State got Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams on campus at the same time. They're working hard on those guys. There's also a commitment. If you're watching this live right now, there's a commitment coming this afternoon from Jaziel Hart with a top 5 of Penn State, Virginia Tech, Michigan, Notre Dame. I think that's 5. I think the news might be good for Penn State on that one, but that's before he takes his official visits. So they clearly got out ahead of him. If they do end up getting him, whoever gets him certainly made a good pitch before the OVs. But a lot coming this summer for the recruiting for Penn State, but also one of the committed 2026 prospects is a guy who has really caught our eye, Johnny. Troy Hune, still don't know how to say it, but the quarterback.
I've been kind of middling it a little bit, or even like saying it a bit muted because I'm not 100% sure yet, but we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. But he got the Elite 11 invite this week, late last night, Wednesday night. He's going to be in the finals for the Elite 11, and that marks, I believe, 4 of the past 5 years for Penn State with a quarterback commit competing at the Elite 11 finals. He played at the State College Regional this past weekend and clearly did a lot of good stuff. He's an interesting prospect in my eyes.
Yeah, Troy, he was, I think you noted it in the story as well that you wrote, but he was kind of like in terms of the rankings and stuff when it was early in the, in the cycle or in the rankings process for these 2026 guys, he was ranked higher when he committed to Penn State than he is now, or, it was kind of after a relatively speaking, so junior season out of Mission Hills in California. And so like his rankings dipped a little bit, but he's still a very talented quarterback. Getting an Elite 11 invitation, kind of, a finals invite, it implies that. And he joins, like you mentioned, past Penn State quarterbacks, recent Penn State quarterbacks, to get an invite. Drew Aller, Jackson Smolik, Ethan Grunkemeyer. Troy is one of 2 quarterbacks in this class, along with Nazareth Peyton Falzone, who, by the way, Penn Live listeners, Blue White Breakdown listeners, watchers, whatever you're doing, if you haven't read the story that Max had on Peyton Falzone, talking to him about his journey, about his recruiting process, really good. Check that out. That's an unsolicited plug. Max didn't even tell me to do that, but it was a good story.
So he was paid to say that too.
Yeah, exactly. No, check that out if you haven't already. But I mean, it's good news to see that. It's also just good for Penn State to have 2 talented quarterbacks in this class after it's their first 2 quarterback class since Bo Prabula and Drew in 2022. So that's what you want to see. That's ultimately what you want to see. You have those 2 quarterbacks locked up already. They're really good at other positions too in terms of numbers. I'm interested to see if Jaziel, if he commits later today, then Penn State at this point will have 5 defensive backs already in the 2026 class. You got Julian Peterson, the corner from Jersey, David Davis from Imani Christian out in Pittsburgh, where I've seen people call him a corner. I've seen people call him a safety. But then you've also got a couple of, actual, safeties in Matt Sieg from Fort Cherry and Darrell Carey from DeMatha. And then they're still recruiting Joey O'Brien hard, the safety from LaSalle, outside Philly here. And they're recruiting Kari Adams, the corner from Maryland, really hard as well. So if they're able to get those 2 over the line and they're able to bring in Jaziel later today,
Mhm.
I mean, they could, in theory, be done already recruiting in the secondary, and then you really just focus on the trenches. But we'll see how all that unfolds.
Yeah, you don't wanna forget about Dorian Barney either, a guy who came in
Yes.
last weekend for the OVs. He's playing in, oh gosh, Georgia, right? Yeah, he's in Georgia, but
Well,
he's
so
from Erie, PA. So, yeah, I
I was just gonna say, yeah, he's playing in Carrollton, New Jersey, Georgia.
yeah.
But I think he only moved there a couple of years ago, originally from Erie. So it's kind of interesting. I did a story earlier this week, wrote a story, and if you haven't already, check it out.
Mhm.
Just on how Penn State is still like, they're dominating the state right now. They're doing their mantra, their slogan, really well in the 2026 cycle with 7 commits from Pennsylvania, and there's still 5, 6, maybe even 7 guys in state that they're looking to bring in. And I counted Dorian Barney in that group
Yeah.
because it's not a best in PA, stay in PA, thing, but it's like a best from PA, come back to PA,
Yeah.
which I'm sure James Franklin and Terry Smith and those guys are making known.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, those are the big fish again, right? Like we talked about that this time last week. Penn State has its eyes on the O'Briens, the Adams, the Barneys of the world because like they have a great foundation in the secondary. They've got a couple of guys who have a lot of upside, but the transformative pieces of this class are Joey O'Brien, Kari Adams, potentially Dorian Barney. So, we're gonna have to keep our eyes on those guys as we go. And the other part of it is like, yes, it's a crowded room if you end up getting all of those names in, but cornerback, safety, those are positions where you will take as many names as you can get that you are interested in because I mean, first of all, there are 4 to 6 defensive backs on the field every single play. So there are plenty of defensive snaps to go around. But then again, so many of those guys contribute on special teams, especially at Penn State. Like so many of these guys who get green lighted as freshmen get green lighted for special teams play because it's been really valuable. I mean, you think of Elliott Washington, Zion Tracy; those guys both played some special teams and are starters now. So they will take all the defensive backs they can get. To finish up the point on Troy Hoon, Hoon, I don't know, man. We'll figure it out. But if you look at the recruitments of Drew Aller, Ethan Grunkemeyer, and Jackson Smolik, all 3 of those guys, after they went to the Elite 11 finals, became huge rankings risers. And obviously, they're all in that quarterback room right now in a group that Penn State feels really comfortable with. So I assume Hun will be a riser himself in this summer. I mean, only 20 quarterbacks in the entirety of the country get invited to this finals event. So it really is the best of the best. Like you have to show out to be able to get there. So it's a big deal for him. And that's not a knock on Peyton Falzone, who also competed on Sunday at the State College Regional, but there is also like I mentioned in the story, there's a big part of this too, where he is undergoing a pretty huge transformation in his throwing motion. He's been working with Brad Mendler, who also works with Drew Aller and Ethan Grunkemeyer, and actually Troy got out there to work with Brad before the Elite 11 this weekend. So, but like, yeah, Falzone's going through a big change himself. It's a great spot to be in with those 2 guys because they have slightly different skill sets and they've both shown really great work ethic and some serious talent too. I think we keep saying it, but this 2026 class is in really great shape and has the potential to just keep adding. So it's in a great spot.
Absolutely. And just one more, kind of a closing thought as we were talking about the corners and the secondary and everything else. And it was a good point you mentioned where, 4 to 6 guys on the field at any given time, especially in today's football, but also in terms of stocking your depth, in terms of, Penn State still being a development first program and not wanting to live and die, with the portal. We've seen impact guys come in the secondary. Look at AJ Harris, Jalen Kimber last year, even Johnny Dixon, Aldavian Collins still with the program after transferring in a few years ago. But that was, I mean, obviously AJ Harris, especially like
Yeah.
big time players that they would take, like that's a big time player they would take it in any scenario. It's just like oh, we have 30 DBs on the roster, I'm still taking that guy out of the
Right.
portal. But
Right.
in terms of not wanting to be in a spot of need and rather want, I think there's a differentiation there when it comes to the portal. And James Franklin talks about it all the time, in terms of just wanting to fill some gaps. They're not a big portal team. And if you're stocking the secondary, and we saw where they're at this past offseason where John Mitchell ends up entering the portal and leaving, because there's so much talent in that room, I think you just continue that process and continue to stack as much talent as you can. They already have a foundation. If they miss out on an O'Brien or they miss out on Kari Adams, they have already good players in the room right now within the program, young, talented players, but also in this class. That even if you add them, it's not like you can't have too many DBs, especially in today's game. So that's all I got, Max. I mean, anything else to add on the recruiting front? We got, like you mentioned, no officials this weekend. It'll pick back up next weekend. But any closing thoughts before we send everyone out to Memorial Day weekend?
No, I think we covered it. I mean, all I've got to say is it really works out that the Cubs are in Cincinnati this weekend. So I'm getting down to Great American, and I hope everybody finds this something nearly as fun to do on their Memorial Day weekend this weekend. And like you mentioned at the top, hope the weather holds, because it hasn't been great, especially across Pennsylvania. So we're hoping for that to get a little bit better. Enjoy the long weekend, and we appreciate you tuning in as always. Next week, if you're with us live, please chat at us. Give us your questions, your comments. We will always try and hit them. But appreciate all of you tuning in live. Appreciate everybody who watches on the recording. And we hope you all take care. This has been the Blue White Breakdown on Penn Live.